Hi, this is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. Now, the reality of it is we do not avoid the maze. We have walked through the maze of life, and the whole concept is when you get to that strange place in the maze, you think you're going to walk into the wall and you're going to knock yourself out. Well, the reality of it is if you're watching what you're doing and you have some guidance, you might be able to find the next exit out of the maze. My guest today is Elle O. Is it Flattery?
O'Flaherty.
Okay. See, everybody knows I mispronounce names, Elle, so I apologize. And I met Elle through podmatch.com. And in her bio, she talks about being an ADHD coach. Now, I know, Elle, we throw these terms around all the time. We throw out ADHD, ADD, non-specific bipolar, Asperger's, which is no longer a condition. Now it's autism spectrum. And the reality of it is we all have these different quirks and different ways of learning and speaking and doing. And sometimes I wonder if that label hurts us or helps us. Now, obviously, you saw a need for coaching in this area. So, do you want to give us a little bit of background and let our viewers and listeners know who you are and how you got to this point?
Absolutely. Thanks, Karen.
Sure.
My first career, I was an attorney for nearly 20 years. And I did international litigation. So what you're typically thinking of as a lawyer. But I just wasn't that well suited to it, frankly. And I was undiagnosed with ADHD. I had never received any treatment or help with it. And I turned to coaching. I started out with another area of coaching. I actually have three major specialties, but ADHD really spoke to me because ADHD coaching, the focus is on future goals and it's giving tools and systems to really make a difference right now. And if I could have had this kind of help when I was younger, it would have been great. So now the ability to work with other folks and to give them these tools, basically so that they are able to work with their brain instead of against it. I often tell people it's like being left-handed with a right-handed can opener. Nothing wrong with being left-handed. It just means that you don't have the right can opener. So giving people those tools, it's very rewarding.
Well, and I love how you came out and you identified it because there are some people in our society that believe ADD, ADHD, autism, there's a look. And if you don't look at, well, hey, you probably don't have it.
Mhm.
And I've often asked, well, what is that look? Okay. I happen to be married to a man who's on the autism spectrum. He didn't know that until his 50s. He just knew that he processed things differently. He just knew that there were certain things that he was so into that he knew about it before he studied it. But he didn't know how he got there. And then my son, my youngest son, at the age of 6, he was this neurotypical until the day he got a diagnosis that he was Asperger's. And the whole community, doctors, teachers said, oh, we got to do something different. And it was like, you're treating symptoms he doesn't have. Why are we doing this? And the interesting part is that instead of doctors, if he would have had coaching, like you said, help him use his brain in the manner that it works rather than fight against it. And you talked about right and left hand. He holds a pen like nobody I've ever met before. He will never have good penmanship, but his hand only feels comfortable in one way to use a pen. And I cannot tell you, like teachers used to be, oh, we're not going to use your left hand, put it behind your back. You got to use your right hand. And they would also say to him, That's not how you hold a pen. And I saw them in school take away papers from him and the pen saying, we're not going to let you write like that in class. So
Mhm.
that doesn't really help us. But luckily, coaching has become more prevalent. And it tends to be that those of us who have something that maybe kept us in the past behind, we're now coming out and saying, you know what, I've learned more. And now I can coach others. So, being ADHD, somebody would say to you, and I've heard it over and over again, so how did you get through law school? Weren't you
Mhm.
fidgety? Wasn't it difficult to do all the things that you had to do? So explain that.
Absolutely. Well, you hit on a very interesting point, and ADHD, of course, is not monolith. So ADD has now been folded under the umbrella of ADHD, and there are three main types. We're still learning quite a bit about ADHD, but
Sure.
they can look quite different. If you have the hyperactive type, that's sort of the typical thinking of a 7-year-old boy bouncing off the walls, all the way up to folks who are more introspective, the daydreamers, and they look quite different. As far as, for me personally, it was a challenge to, especially as you get later and later in schooling, when there's less and less structure. That's when people who are ADHD tend to have more challenges. I found kind of tools that worked for me, and found my way through the cracks. It would have been much easier for sure if I had known then the tools that I know now. Um, but you hit on a really important point. ADHD is still one of the most stigmatized neurological differences. One of the reasons that I am extremely out and loud about my diagnosis is because so many people can't be. And it's about 68% of people in the workplace don't ever disclose that they have ADHD because of that stigma. And so one of my big goals through coaching is and speaking is frankly to get people to see that this is what ADHD can look like. You might never guess that, I was a international trade attorney. I had a successful career. Um, and frankly, some of the huge strengths of ADHD are what have made me successful. We tend to be highly creative. When I started my business, I thought I was kind of taking a wild leap, but it turns out ADHD people are 300% more likely to be entrepreneurs. So a lot of folks in the C-suite level, and I tend to work with professionals and executives.
Sure.
A lot of those folks actually have ADHD because they have this creativity and they're able to see things that other people can't see. So part of that creativity helped me get through and figure out things that work for me. But yeah, I think it's really unfortunate that people are afraid to be diagnosed or to disclose that they're ADHD because of this stigma, when really we're about somewhere between 5 and 10% of the population. It's actually a huge population of people who have ADHD. And up until the Industrial Revolution, we we had much easier time in society, and the gene that we think is responsible for ADHD, I'm sorry to go into biology for those
That's
folks who aren't
okay.
into it,
Sure.
um, but it's always been positively selected throughout all of human history. The NIH actually did some modeling showing that having a minority of people in an early human group with our kind of characteristics was critical for human survival. So we might not be great in front of computers sitting in little cubicles, but alternative careers and other ways of working are kind of magic for us.
It's interesting because when my son went away to college, I should step back. When he was in a high school, he was very lucky. He had a couple of instructors who saw his strengths and
Mhm.
they allowed him to move in that direction. So if he was supposed to write a paper, for instance, at the drop of a hat, he could say to the instructor, I'll give my presentation right now. And
Mhm.
the instructor would look at him, and if they didn't understand, he'd say, no, it's not written down, but I'll record it. So you have a copy of my presentation. And he would stand up, he would give this presentation, he would know all the facts, he was giving footnotes. And some instructors got very upset with that, and others loved it because they said, look, not everybody can put it down on paper. And if we look at our history, how many men were successful, but they had secretaries who did all their written work. They dictated, but it was up to the secretary, excuse me, to make sure that everything was spelled right and everything was put on that piece of paper correctly. And it's not that they couldn't have done it, but they didn't have the tools like you're talking about to do some of those things. So there was no shame in having somebody help them. And, I was so proud of my son that he would do that. Now, we found out by accident that my husband is also on the spectrum. And how that occurred just about the time that my youngest was becoming a teenager. I started noticing that my husband was acting more like our son than the adult that he was. All of a sudden, he found this, gravitating force. They had so much in common. Whereas when he was little, Dad didn't see it. And so I called up my son's doctor and I said, we need a family appointment. And he saw my husband interacting with our son that way. And he said, would you mind if I put you through some testing? And it was like an eye opener. My husband had to reconfigure what he was doing, realizing that he wasn't 13, 14 years old. And so to be even talking my son's language was not the best thing. But I love what you said about that, the creativity part, because I just have seen so many people that have been pushed down for their creativity because nobody understands it.
Yep. It's unfortunate. And especially when you think of schooling or typical workplaces, you're really expected to act in a certain way, like you mentioned. But when you think of some of the famous folks who are ADHD, and one who's very classic, what people typically think of, like Robin Williams, for instance, you can't put him in a box. His genius was that he was so creative and was so willing to do things that other people didn't. So yeah, I love that. And expecting everyone to act the same, especially as we learn more about ADHD or ASD, different things, it's kind of unreasonable, I think. And you know, what you said about your husband being diagnosed as an adult, I'm curious. Many of my clients come to me when their children are diagnosed, and they go through a grieving process, many of them thinking about what could have been if they had known earlier in life. Did your husband have any of that?
Um, no, it was like this aha moment for him.
Mhm.
It's okay that I can't match my clothes. Okay. And this is the funny part. Before I met him, he realized one day that when he would get dressed for work, he didn't look right. He couldn't understand what it was. And so he went to a men's store. He found a woman working there and he said, I need you to help me. Tell me what would look good on me. I need a suit. I need slacks. I need a sport jacket. And from that moment on, that's how he would buy his clothes. He'd find a woman
Right.
in the store rather than a man, because he found that men would say, oh, you like that shirt? Yeah, I'll sell it to you. When I came along, I noticed in his closet, he had certain things together because that's what he bought and that's what the female salesperson told me looked good on him. And then he had these other clothes that it was like, those are like 20, 30 years old. Where did you get those from? And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, that's how I dress myself, but this is how other people dress me. And so I became his dresser, you know, uh, and to this day, I still am, but he now has, sort of gotten in a pattern. I know now what goes together. But when he got diagnosed, it was like he felt free. It's like, okay, so I tell these really corny jokes. Corny jokes make me laugh. if they're not corny, I don't quite get them. It was like, oh, okay. So now I understand. So then he started going to the comedy club because he wanted to understand different humor. And
Mhm.
he's at it, in his car, he listens to Syrinx and only comedy shows. And now he can tell the inflections in voices, whereas growing up, he didn't. Everybody sounded the same to him. So
That
no,
makes sense.
yeah. So no, he didn't mourn. I also was ecstatic because now I could understand some of the things that he did that looked a little strange. And sometimes I would
Mhm.
ask him about it and he had no idea. It was, no, that's how I do it. I'd be like, okay, if that's how you do it, you do it. But usually people will give you an answer. Well, I learned how to do it from my mother, or I took a class. Not him.
Mhm. I love hearing you say that you also learned about ASD so that you could understand him better. Those of us who are neurodivergent, we typically spend a good amount of time understanding neurotypical society and masking some of our natural tendencies to fit in more. And it would be so great if more neurotypical people would take the time to understand our tendencies and what they can kind of expect from us. My husband has done a lot of education for himself as well, and it makes everything make a lot more sense. And he understands where I'm coming from too. Have you changed your home at all? We spent some time making our home more ADHD friendly in a number of ways, and it's very comforting and comfortable to live in an environment that supports you. Have you all done anything like that?
So this is the interesting part. My husband does like things that are neat. Okay. But he doesn't like his work environment neat. And we do share an office. So my studio is half of the office and he's on the other half. But it never looks clean. I'm so glad that, the screen only sees what's behind me. It doesn't see what's around me. I'm a neat freak. And he's okay with that as long as he has that space, like he does, where he doesn't have to be neat. He can tell you where every single piece of paper is in this house. And I file things. If it's not in the file drawer, either I've misplaced it or somebody took it out. But he'll put it under a mat, he'll put it under the printer, put it on the floor.
Mhm.
And in the beginning, when I met him, that was very disturbing to me. It was, if you ever asked me to go find last year's taxes, if they're not in the file drawer, I'm never going to be able to find them. And he'd go, well, yeah, I need to keep them here in case I have to refer to them this year.
Mhm.
And I said, well, if I put them over in this file cabinet and it has the year on it, will that be okay? And that was one thing he said, no,
Mhm.
I need it within hand's reach. Okay, so that doesn't get filed. So
Yes.
I've had to learn, and I'm glad it's just in the office because when I first met him and saw how he kept his house, I now understand that. I didn't understand it for the first couple months we were together. But I sort of played into it and realized as I was cleaning things up, he was making more of a mess in his office at that time. And he was a happy camper.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
It's so funny you bring up filing. That comes up pretty often with my clients, especially I often work with people's partners too, so that they can understand what's going on. He might want to try, this is just a suggestion, but sometimes I offer a tip for folks to do a visual filing system that can look at a couple different ways. One of the ways, for instance, is hanging the files underneath a table so that you can see all of them. They're not in a cabinet. And so it's still neat, they're filed, but
Right.
for us, we really like to see things out in the open. So it's just an idea. ASD and ADHD actually have quite a bit of overlap.
Right.
So some of these are really helpful for both of our populations.
So I'm glad he got diagnosed when he did, because his mother, when she would describe him, she'd say, "Yeah, Rich marches to the beat of a different drummer, but he's loving, he's caring, he'll give you the shirt off his back." And that used to bother him because it made him feel like, you know, I'm different. Why are you identifying me as that? And his younger brother was dyslexic. And when he couldn't get the help he needed in school here in the Cleveland area, his parents sent him away to boarding school. So here, my husband knows that there's something different about him. But there was something different about his brother, but his brother was being treated. And not that he really thought he needed to be treated, but he felt that he needed to be understood better. And when he got that diagnosis in his 50s, grateful that his mother was still alive and with us and understood everything. And we went and sat her down and we told her. Now, her first reaction was, "Well, you're not blaming me." And we said, "No, we're not blaming anybody. And it's not about blame. It's about now understanding." And so she and I took some online classes together. I actually took them and talked to her about them because the computer was just too confusing to her, but she was willing to learn and to understand. Um, and to me, that was the best gift she could give him, is now she, she didn't bring that up anymore. It wasn't he marches to the beat of a different drummer. She'd say, "Well, Rich is comfortable doing it that way." It's like, okay, that's a good way of
Love
putting
that.
it. Yeah.
That absolutely is the best gift you can give someone. And I mean, anyone really, neurodivergent or not, expecting everyone to act and behave in the same way is it's ridiculous, frankly. But yeah, feeling like people understand you and accept you as you are is so huge. A lot of us have in the ADHD community and ASD, I'm sure, have grown up getting the message that, oh, there's something wrong with us, that we're lazy or irresponsible. And unfortunately, it gets internalized. One of the big things that I coach people through is the negative self-talk that really is the voice of other people that we've internalized. So finding a supportive, place, or understanding the community more and connecting with, I always tell people to connect to the ADHD community because suddenly everyone is similar and it all
Right.
makes sense. But that really is just so soothing and calming after a lifetime of being told, "Oh, you're not doing it right. Why aren't you doing things whichever way?"
Well, for my son, it was just the opposite. So he was very active in a national autism group, and he did speaking engagements. And we were at an event one day, and the director came up to him and said, "Alex, I have this perfect girl I want to introduce you to." And she was on the spectrum, but nowhere near his level. And he was friendly to her. He talked to her. He was supportive. And for weeks, the director kept saying, "Are you going to ask her out?" And it was like, "Why do I have to ask her out?" "Well, you talk to her, you send her some information, you know, like, wouldn't she be a good girlfriend?" And it was that day that my son said, "If anybody ever talks to me like that again," he said, "I probably will have the biggest meltdown." He said, "I'm not saying that I won't be with somebody who has the same diagnosis as me, similar to me, but don't tell me that's the only person that I
Mhm.
can date or marry." And people in this local organization did not understand it. They were very frustrated with him because I think what they were hoping, looking back, is that they could show how two people got together through their organization. And I
Um,
said, on many occasions, "Why can't you talk about how they've become friends? How he's learning from her, she's learning from him. They don't have to date. They don't have to get married and have babies." Okay. Um, and now that he's off on his own doing the things that he's doing, occasionally I'll hear from somebody on Facebook saying, was Alex ever diagnosed properly? It's like, so you're telling me he's not on the spectrum. Okay. Right now, it doesn't
Yeah, and
make any
that's
difference if he is or not. He's living his life.
yeah, and that's such a problem to expect a stereotypical look to a certain neurodivergent
Right.
population, just like neurotypical people. I mean, there are millions and millions and millions of us, and just like neurotypical people are incredibly diverse. You would never expect two people to act the same way, or that you would want to get them dating just because they both happen to be humans. Um, you know, expecting the same thing out of ADHD folks is
Exactly.
it's not helpful. And it's funny, in my talks, I really try to give a huge range of behavior because, yes, we have some typical symptoms and some typical strengths and challenges, but it's incredibly variable. The reason I don't love the name ADHD, attention deficit, we don't really have a deficit of attention. It's that we have variable attention. And so if there's something that we're really interested in, and honestly, I think it was the secret to starting my business, for instance, we get super focused and we can be the most productive people you've ever seen. When I was starting my business, I would work for 16, 18 hours at a stretch and not realize how long I'd been working just because I was really interested in coaching. And so expecting someone who's flighty and irresponsible, it would be completely opposite in depending on the situation. So that situational variability and individual variability, I think, is really important to recognize.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting because my son started out, um, his love has always been sports. And he fell in love with baseball when he was 2 years old. I was traveling. So at night, his dad would say to him, you can fall asleep in bed with me while we're watching the baseball game. And I think my husband would fall asleep before him, but that's a whole other story. And uh, the first baseball game he ever saw was at the time they were the Cleveland Indians against the Baltimore Orioles. Now he's 2 years old. He hears the word Orioles. Well, of course, it's just like the cookie. It's the Oreos. And he fell in love with baseball because it connected to his favorite cookie. Um, and by the age of 4, he knew baseball. And, my husband and I would look at him and go, well, how do you know that? And he would hear the broadcasters talking about it and he absorbed it. Um, so for the last 5 years, he was working for a major league team, loved it, but he realized probably for the first time in his life, hey, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to be able to go anywhere for a while. I've got to look outside and maybe I have to leave baseball for a while. So he did a search and he's now with 2 other teams. He's with a lacrosse team and the Women's National Basketball Association. His talents have totally changed. This is a young man who now is doing designing. He is giving talks in ways that he never did before. And I just sit back and I look at him and I know that he's always had this in him. But this group gave him the ability to say, hey, do you want to try it? He said, sure, why not? And last week, while I was taking care of him down in Texas, he says to me, Mom, I really am artistic. And then he showed me a couple of his designs, and I'm just like, well, you probably got that from your grandmother. So, kudos to you. And that's what I want our listeners to understand, that there is no certain look, there is no certain ability or disability. And I really wish they would take it off job applications that you have to declare, because it's not a disability. It's a totally
Mhm.
different ability for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. I loved that he stayed true to himself. But something he found so enthralling when he was 4 has
Yep.
gone throughout his life and taken him great places. It's always been strange to me that when we're children, people tend to say, oh, you are the artistic one, you are the athletic one, whatever box, and labels that people put us in, when no one is one thing and everyone is highly variable. And that translates, I think, into the workplace. Whereas in generations past, you could maybe start in the mailroom and move up to be the CEO and try different things. More and more now, people are unfortunately getting locked into certain
Right.
areas. So if you join a company in marketing, then you are a marketing person, and it's hard to move out of that box. But people like us who really enjoy following our interests, and also, our interests change. It's it's unfortunate that we aren't more flexible in what we think people can do and the opportunities that we give them. When you're saying that team let him try something new, that's amazing. I
Yeah.
think that's one really strong way to make people happy in the workplace. And as we're seeing now, when companies are trying to figure out how to retain people and to keep workers happy, I think that could be a huge way to do it.
Well, and one of the reasons I personally left corporate America was I worked at a college. I knew I was helping my students. My students were excited about being in school. They would come to me and thank me semester after semester. Even since I've left, I get emails from them. But I didn't do it the way the college wanted me to. I was successful. I couldn't follow their pattern. And I remember one day being called in and saying, Karen, these are the steps you have to do every day. And I'd go, that's great. But do you see my numbers? I have the numbers, but I also have the satisfaction from my students. So maybe there is a different way. Well, we can't have everybody doing it their own way. I said, but I'm using your information and I'm molding it so that I'm good at what I do. And I finally was sort of asked, wouldn't you like to retire? Do you really like what you're doing? And I got to the point that I had to leave because the culture had sucked it all out of me. And it wasn't until about a year or two in doing the podcasting and doing websites that I finally looked back and I thought, it's a shame because I had other colleagues that were as talented as I was, but they were being wasted because they were checking off the boxes. And soon after
Mhm.
I left, they all left. So that tells a story, as far as I'm concerned, that employers have to look and say, hey, if you're successful in doing it and you're not undercutting us and you're not doing anything wrong, go for it.
Yeah,
And that's what I tell
absolutely.
and that's why I tell my clients, you're not stealing their business. In fact, you're so happy to be there. I was putting in 10, 12 hours a day because I loved what I was doing. And they didn't want
Yeah.
me there that long. But if I'm happy,
And
so
that's the thing. I think it's you know, some people have trouble imagining different ways to do it. It seems to me, and I know it's probably more work as a manager, for instance, having people doing things in different ways. But one of the huge things that ADHD coaching accomplishes is that it does teach people the way that their brain wants to do things. And so I often ask my clients when they say, "Oh, I can't get motivated to do something, or I can't complete this task that I'm trying to do in a certain way," and I'll say, "Well, who said you had to do it that way? And does that work for you?" And so many times it's just because that is how they were told they have to do it instead of what really works for them.
exactly. Well, it's interesting because 2 weeks ago today, my son got ill. He refused to go to the hospital until 12 hours after having so much pain. Um, he was trying to cure it in his head. He ended up having emergency gallbladder surgery. And he's very
I'm sorry
lucky
to hear
he
that.
had it because this thing was about to explode. Um, so I flew down to Texas because He's only been there for 4 months. Yes, he knows his coworkers, but his coworkers aren't going to come take care of him. And what I chose to do was I'm going to follow his rules of what he needs because I'm in his house. It's not like when he lived at home.
Mm.
And the difference of our communication was it was exceptional. And, it was like, okay, this is where you like to put, your mail. Okay. But we can't find
Mhm.
it all. I said, so would it be okay if I get a container and you put your mail in there? And maybe when it gets to a certain level, you realize, hey, maybe I better go through it. Oh, Mom, that's a great idea because I'm not using my island because of the mess it had.
Yeah.
He was leaving all of his pills that he had to take by his bedside. And he was complaining because every time he touched something, it would fall on the floor. So my next comment was, the doctor does want you to get in and out of bed. And I'm here
Mhm.
if you can't. I said, so why don't we put all your medication in the corner of the kitchen sink? Most of those pills you're going to take when you have to eat. So you're going to be out there. But if you can't
Mhm.
get to them, I will bring it to you. And it was like, oh, I won't keep dropping things on the floor and asking you to pick them up. And I said, yes. So I wasn't telling him how it had to be done. It was all in suggestions. And when I left Sunday morning, he said, I like this mom. And
Oh, I love that.
I said, well, I like this mom too. I said, but you have to realize when you were living at home, I still saw you as that little boy. Okay. And I
Mhm.
would tell you, pick up your clothes and whatever. I said, and yes, you're a young man living at home, but we didn't go through those transitions. Now we have. And
Oh, I
I
love
think
that.
I think it's important that we have to connect to where you are, where he is.
Mhm.
Because if not, we're speaking a foreign language.
Absolutely. And that's so respectful the way you did it. It respects him as a person, and it respects that the way he needs or wants to do things is just as good
Yep.
as any other way, which
Yep.
I love that. That is such a good attitude to come with.
And it felt comfortable for me because, like I said, for so many years, I was listening to the doctors and the therapists saying, you have to make sure that he does these things. And it was always an argument or a fight. And it's like, but it didn't have to be. If somebody would have
Mhm.
explained to me, figure out where he's coming from. And it took us a long time. I
Mhm.
remember a couple years ago, I don't even know what it was about, but he had a really bad meltdown. And usually I would try to stop the meltdown. And
Mhm.
instead, what I did, closed his bedroom door and I went to a different part of the house and I turned the TV up so I didn't have to hear it.
Mhm.
And it did short circuit it quite a bit because he finally came downstairs and he goes, I just needed to get it out. And I thought, and if I had realized that all these years, but instead
Mhm.
you're trying to get in the middle of a fight that has nothing to do with you. So you get beaten
Mhm.
up, but the fight goes on. And now it's like, okay, I may not understand why you're having that meltdown. And it's okay that you're having it because you need to have it. I don't. So I'm going to separate myself.
And I bet no one ever taught you those skills
Oh,
or
no.
showed you how to work with him. It's one, I don't work with children, but it's one of the reasons why I really like to work with people's partners as well as the client, because if you can understand that and give the kind of support that people need, it's a complete game changer.
Yes.
So I love that you found that on your own, even without getting support.
Well, and part of it was, taking coaching classes, trying to understand. I
Mhm.
was trying to coach myself. And that's why I started taking the classes. It was,
Mhm.
how can I be different? Because I can't live in trauma like this all the time, not knowing when the next shoe is going to drop and knowing that it affects my husband. So typically, if Alex had a meltdown and his dad wasn't around, I didn't tell dad about it because dad would have had a meltdown because his son had a meltdown. And I found that once I wasn't sharing some of that information, the house got calmer and calmer. And it was just something that I had sensed of what I had done in the past. I would run to my husband because he put so much noise in my head. I wanted somebody else to take it out. But when I started
Mhm.
doing the coaching classes, I realized I can take it out. I can find a way to find where I need to be. And so I'm so glad that you do it with couples because I've seen too many marriages break up because
Yep.
they don't want to deal with it.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I do the same with executive teams often because many founders, as I said, CEOs, tend to have ADHD, or anyone who's neurotypical under stress starts having some of these same executive function challenges. So understanding what's going on with yourself and with your team, it's the same idea. It really helps to see why people are reacting in certain ways and what they might need instead of assuming the worst.
Absolutely.
It's Whenever I work with these teams, one of the major things that I really like to drive home is assume good intentions. People aren't doing things on purpose to, get in the way or to throw a wrench into the works. So assume that it's because of something that's going on, but that the people themselves really want to contribute and participate and be a team player, which I know it can be hard in the moment, but it really is such a good message. And it sounds like you've received that message.
Um, I did. I'm sorry it took me this long to do it, but once you do, um, you know, if you're honest with yourself, you can mend some of those bridges that you broke
Mhm.
along the way. Um, and it's quite interesting because with him down in Texas, um, he wanted me to go and see his office. And I hate driving in a city that I don't know. And we tried it the night before. I went 2 blocks and I said, nope, I'm not driving here. I said, but if you want to go to your office, we'll take an Uber. You know, I said, do you want a sane mom when we get there? Or do you want me feeling as crazy as I feel right now? And he said, I prefer you being sane. Okay, we'll take an Uber. Um, and I found that explaining it that way in the past, I probably wouldn't have. I would have just said, we're not going to your office. There's no way. I'm not going to spend the money. But it was like, I have to do this for me. It's for him too. But initially, it's for me because I know how things are going to affect me. And so, even the neurotypical individual has their own issues going on. We may not have a label, okay? Um, but I don't like labels anyways. I like to know that people have different ways of doing things and learning from them.
Mhm. Yeah, and being gentle with ourselves. I love that you took the time to pause and just think, what is going on here and what do I need in the moment? That's not always easy, but
Yeah.
it's an incredibly important skill to have for all of us.
Well, and it keeps me healthy. So that's the important
Sure.
thing. So tell my listeners how they can find you and um, you know, maybe one key phrase that would explain um, why it's so important to go through coaching.
Absolutely. I'm going to start there. You know, Coaching, I think of the way I describe it is it's like having a garden bed and having a therapist or a psychiatrist or a doctor who diagnoses you and tells you what's going on. Their job is really to pull the weeds, get the rocks out of the soil, that sort of a thing. Coaching is forward leaning. So we're much more like, let's make a plan for the bed and a goal and go towards it. So coaching is really what will take you into the future. And I love that, and seeing the progress every time you with someone, it's amazing. People can see me. I do quite a few speaking events. And so, I'm at different conferences and things. I'm also available if people would like to talk about ADHD or executive function in their organization. My website is www.interlacesolutions.com. And you can go on there and you can use a little button on there to book a consultation. I'm always happy to talk to people. I actually have a team of coaches who I've picked and trained, and they're wonderful, who coach under me as well. So yeah, definitely come. And if anyone is on LinkedIn, I do have a LinkedIn newsletter called ADHD Professionals and Execs. I publish every month, and there are lots of good practical solutions for things that people might be struggling with.
I love it. I love it because, you know, you may, like I said, you may not have been diagnosed, but you may see things in your own behavior that says, I
Hmm.
need to make some changes. Um, and that's what I started doing 10 years ago. And my first reaction was, how's my family going to react if I
Yeah.
change? And I didn't tell them exactly what I was doing. And things started gradually. Um, when I made my announcement 2 weeks ago that yes, I am going to start coaching because that's something I've always wanted to do, but
Hmm.
I didn't think I would have the support to do it. Um, and when I told my husband, he was like, oh my God, it's about time. And I said,
Oh, so
wow,
good.
what does that mean? And he goes, because you helped me so much. And that's when it just like dawned on me. Yeah, I've been coaching for the last 10 years. So
Yeah,
now it's
exactly.
not time to take it out, into the real world. And he mentioned it to one of his new colleagues at work. And he said, can I contact your wife? He said, because I feel stuck. And so my
Mm.
husband said, absolutely. And so last night he comes home and he said, this person is going to be calling you. And at 8 o'clock this morning, my phone rang and that person was calling me and saying, you know, I'm stuck. I don't care who knows I'm stuck, but I need to get out of this rut. And we talked for a half hour. Like you said, you know, no charge for that initial phone call. We got to know each other. And I said to him, now this is what I want you to do. I want you to think about if I'm the right person or not. I have a list of people that I interview regularly. There's a lot of coaches out there. So if I'm not the right one,
Mhm.
I'm gonna find one for you. And he goes, I won't know if you're the right one until we get started. I said, that's fair. And if you decide in the middle that I'm not, I said, no hard feelings because I want you to get what you need out of this. And I think that's how the majority of us all feel. And I love what you're doing. I think it's terrific. Um, and just the best of luck going into the future and stay in touch with us.
Thank you. I would love to. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you. That's wonderful. Just
Thank
making a
you.
difference in someone's life is so great.
I'm looking
But thank
forward
you.
to
It's
it.
great to talk to you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Very good. Have a great day, Elle. Bye bye now.
You too.